Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to Quaker Libertarian's video conversations. My name is Matt Hisrich, and I'm here with my Jays, Juliet and Jared, who are going to help us in our conversation today. I've got a cup of tea, and I'm excited to dive in. We're picking up where we left off last time, which was the question of what do you do with big problems that can't be solved easily. We're going to tackle that in a moment. We're going to center down for a bit first. Okay. Good to see both of you again, and thank you for everybody who is joining us via video. So Quakers talk about this, Libertarians talk about this in different ways, multiple ideas, using different language, decentralization, localization, what's the big fancy word, subsidiarity. Basically, the idea that more local solutions make more sense than large global solutions. Although I think wasn't William Penn involved in creating some like international organization? We can talk about all that. But we started in our last video just sort of touching on the idea that what do you do when there is a global pandemic or a major natural disaster or financial crisis that's global, all these kind of big problems, and then you have all these people talking about local solutions. What do? Do you just at that point throw up your hands and say, we need the federal government, we need the United Nations to come in and help us solve these issues? Is there an answer, a Quaker Libertarian answer to those kinds of scenarios? What do we think?
My big question is, what are those scenarios? So what are the things that people generally say, oh, maybe they agree with us that we can make it, the voluntary solutions and the decentralized solutions can work for X, Y, and Z. What are the things that people think are too big generally? So you mentioned a couple, but give us more.
Sure. Well, certainly military, that comes up often, that there are sort of crises that require an international military response. We call it peacekeeping. Solving genocide, that comes up, that term gets thrown around from time to time, that require outside military intervention. And do we want to organize that by a coalition of the willing? Do we want to organize it by an extra-national body like the United Nations, NATO, something like that, to send in troops around the world? That's another example that comes to mind. Global warming is another one that comes up where, this is a global problem, just as the name implies, and we can't solve it by meeting in our neighborhood and putting non-fluorescent bulbs in. That this is more complicated. It requires big answers. Somewhere in there's got to be something to work with.
Well, I think in some of the previous videos that we've done, Juliet brought up a lot of the who's going to maintain, like in our discussion about who's going to pay for the roads, right. Who's going to maintain those roads once they're built, and who's liable for if something goes wrong, that sort of thing. I think a lot of that can be integrated into this discussion as well, because if we have a community-based issue, maybe the water in your general area has been polluted. the community can go through and come up with measures locally on how to help with making water more pure, and come up with solutions locally for themselves that don't necessarily require, the federal government making you have to totally do a complete water system repair, which is something that Kansas City has had to do recently. They've had to replace basically all their water lines because they didn't meet code. But if you have management that is proactive instead of reactive, sometimes you can manage solutions a little better.
Fair enough.
It's a thought. I don't know.
No, I think that opens us up in the right direction. I think the who is interesting to me. So you kind of brought up liability, what we've talked about before, and liability is responsibility, right? So that is important. Who's going to fix it? Who's going to do these things? Who's liable? But the other piece, I think, that the Quaker perspective brings in is affinity, natural affinity, and what we're led to do. What's the divine calling us to do? So I realize not all libertarians are theists, and that's okay. And not even all Quakers are theists today, right? But generally we can agree, most people can agree that there's a higher, at least our best of ourselves, right? And that there's benefit in tuning into that and tuning into what the best decision is. You do all the research and then you do what the best thing is, or you try to meditate on that. As Quakers, certainly we try to meditate and listen to what that is. So I think that does have to venture into this. When I think about, like you were talking about genocide, what if foreign aid or really even taxes at all, instead of being, there's a group of people that debate about it and argue about it, is you decide what you want to contribute to. And you either send people over, and it's kind of mercenaries, but hopefully, positive mercenaries. There's a genocide going on in Rwanda, and the Hutus are or whoever is being hurt, and they've asked for help. Then maybe we want to send money over or go over and help. So I think there's a piece of natural affinity, and yeah, I don't know. That's my first thought.
Okay. So, there is an organization called Christian Peacemaker Teams that does along the lines of what you're describing, that they sort of put themselves in the line of danger in the hopes that their presence will mediate some international conflicts. I think they've modified their approach somewhat in recent years, kind of worried about white savior complex, that kind of thing. But it's that same idea that if you're worried about something, put yourself where your concern is. And if you don't want to just say, oh, okay, United States government, send some troops down there, what's your alternative? And so that's one organization that's tried to come up with another way. I think I've been reading about the civil rights movement and some of the things that took place there, where that was another situation where a group was saying, our local government, our state government is corrupt. We need federal intervention in order to move the dial here, in order to get some justice where there is no justice. Pop culture reference might be the A-Team. So we've got an issue here, and our local authorities aren't handling it. We need somebody at the sort of next level of power to come in and help out, because we're sort of trapped in this local context that's not bringing about justice. What do you do? So there's sort of the theoretical, how do we handle some of these questions, but also the very more concrete of, I'm the one who's being affected, and how do I find a solution if I'm in this local context that isn't? That's a different way of thinking about it than, are there problems too big? But there may be problems that people would look to a state or a national or international authority to help bring about justice.
So authority is an interesting word. I'll just interject real quickly. Is authority real? What is authority, I guess, is kind of what comes to mind. And if there is no such thing as external authority except God, can we, what is that level of international, who do we ask for help? So if we're the ones that need the help in our community, we're Flint, Michigan, and our water is poisoned and we don't have the money, we're community members to fix this, and our state is ignoring us. So, I still don't know if that's been fixed. What can we do? Who do we call?
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
That really is a interesting and good example, I guess. We just today in our meeting for worship, we discussed some of the things that people are doing outside of this country, and in Rwanda and in Congo, and how they're ministering to the whole person, sort of thing. It's a discipleship for development is the program that it's called. And something interesting that was mentioned in that was one of the pastors in the community, they got their water from a stream. And of course they walked through the stream, so their feet are making mud, so their fresh water is always dirty, among other things. So what this one pastor did was he built it so that the stream would go through a pipe and flow over into the puddle that they used to draw the water from, instead of just going into the puddle directly. And that then took the water off of the ground so that you could filter it a little better. So that is something that he personally chose to do for him and his family, but it is something that the wider community also benefits from. And of course, he probably had to get permission from everybody while he is doing it, so that they could all agree that this would be a better solution. But there are other organizations. There's one group called Potters for Peace, that they're a group of ceramic artists, basically, and potters that make ceramic water filters and show people in areas that have bad water that how to make a ceramic water filter, and out of the resources that they have available to them, so that you can just dump all the dirty water into the filter and it comes out nice and clean. And it's there's solutions to a lot of problems, that just because we get into a mindset that it's too big for us, we might not fully understand what solutions we can do. It's everybody can get a filter and filter their water in places that have poor water. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere. The well that we got our water for at our home was not drinkable. It was okay to wash clothes and that sort of thing, take showers in, but you couldn't drink it. So we had to come up with our own way of drinking the water, because there wasn't another solution available. We didn't have the water company to go through because there was no water company. So we had to boil all the water that we did and distill it so that we'd had clean water for ourselves and our family. So I think if we limit ourselves, sometimes we're not getting the full scope of the possibilities because we're only looking to one source to alleviate our problems.
Yeah, I wonder, kind of going back to Juliet's comment around the affinity, there is sort of this built-in model or structure or understanding of authority level, if you want to use that. X is not responsive. I'm going to escalate to the next rung up the ladder. And are there ways in which we as actors say, I can do something here right now to alleviate this situation. I can work at whatever level I have strengths and gifts and to move the dial a little bit closer to justice, however we want to frame that. And maybe that is appealing to the state legislature. Maybe it is sort of working within the system, but also trying to find solutions that don't rely on state intervention, come up with voluntary solutions. I don't know, it can be, we can come out with perhaps, it's maybe all of the above. It's maybe a mix of some of that. I don't know, what do we think?
Well, I mean, I was kind of looking at, as you were talking, I was thinking about what, with the modern tools that we have today, it's a little bit easier to, like if you weren't getting what you needed in your local community because of transportation limitations, information, it wasn't always easy to appeal upwards or to appeal outwards to more people. And I think today with social media, with alternate social media, we have the mainstream ones that have some degree of, you have to follow X narrative or you can't be there. But there's also, outside alt tech or whatever. You also have, you have social media, but we also have our communities, like whether it's our religious communities, whatever our affinity communities are, we're not just limited to our local area anymore. And so I was thinking about, there's all these micro lending, like I forget, there was one called Kiva a while ago where you could do micro loans to people in other parts of the world. I don't know if we have similar things. I mean, GoFundMe and Indiegogo and stuff like that end up working that way, but usually the person that wants the loan is asking, right? Or not the loan, that wants the investment. And, if you scale that up, it's interesting because it doesn't look that different than the charters that started the United States, except that they're voluntary and there's no monopoly granted by government. So my understanding of whether it's William Penn's charter for Pennsylvania or Plymouth Colony or Virginia Colony is that the government, the Crown, granted the monopolistic right to all the resources in that place. But the way it was funded was actually funded by individuals that paid for their own passage and investment money for building materials, food, and then to pay passage for, I don't know if they were all indentured servants or whatever, but people that were poorer that were going to do the work, right? So there was investment and then they got more out of it. So, as Quakers, we want to be a little careful of fairness and, whatever, but, could that be done, investment be done without, in a voluntary manner? I mean, isn't that what the stock market is? So like, I'd love to see, there exists light nuclear today, where the half-life of the waste material is like 75 years, as opposed to our current nuclear in this country, the half-life is way longer than that, right? But why can't you get those nuclear, I think they're lithium and thorium reactors, right? Why can't you get that going? It's regulation that's in the way. So if you pull that regulation away, I'm sure there's investors that want to that would be happy to invest in thorium nuclear reactors, because they're going to get a return on that. They're going to get part of it to sell. So I think it's a mix of NGOs, which is what we're talking about, and profit, right? I don't know. That's kind of where I'm going.
Well, if you had said we're going to be talking about nuclear reactors today, I really couldn't have seen that coming. So I will say, you mentioned Kiva, and yes, it's still going. You can still go on there and make small loans. And there is a Quaker group and a Libertarian group. I don't know that there's a Quaker Libertarian group yet, but both of those groups have loans that they try to identify and fund. And it makes me think, as you're talking about that there are these sort of parallel structures within Libertarian Party and within Quakerism, where you have local meetings that sort of scale up. Or, in the Quaker environment, we think of quarterly meetings, yearly meetings, sort of large organizations, and similarly with party structures, down at the county level, up to the state level, national, that kind of thing. And if these structures are working well, there can be flows of communication along those lines. So, okay, we've got an issue here that we could use everybody's help, whether that's funding, whether that's showing up. We've got people need repairs after a storm, that kind of thing. They can send people in. And like, for instance, in Indiana, we just had an issue where the state legislature was going to try to restrict third-party access to the ballot, because the Libertarian candidate for governor in the last election did really well. Guess what? Democrats and Republicans didn't like that. And so this call went out. This was happening, and it went out through all the sort of party circles, so that there was this national pressure that was put on, awareness being raised. Okay, this is what they're slipping into this bill, that kind of thing, to amplify the situation, raise awareness. And I think there are ways that the sort of structures that we have, both among friends and among libertarians, can be part of these solutions, potentially. All voluntary, of course.
Well, just I'm kind of laughing because this week I gave a message on John 2, which is the cleansing of the temple that Jesus did, and what made Jesus so angry is what I was really looking at. And I titled the message, "The Idolatry of Good Intentions." Because why was there a market in the temple courts? Well, because obviously there was a need, and so they provided for the need. And it started out, I'm sure it started out with all good intentions of being a good, positive thing for the people that were coming to the temple.
Sure.
The problem is they had to go to the temple, and then they had to participate in that to be considered upstanding in their community. And then there's a limited market, so then it opens up the door for corruption. So I think a lot of that as well is we can have good intentions, but are we actually helping? And that's a question that a lot of charitable organizations have to ask themselves. Are we actually helping, or are we compounding the problem? Because you can give a man a fish, the cliche, or you can teach a man to fish and feed him forever. It's better to teach them how to fish than to just give them a fish, because they can do it themselves later on. And so I think that's part of what we have to discuss as well. Is we can have good intentions. We can start something that is really good, but we have to take into consideration what's going on locally how can they maintain it, or if they can even maintain it, or are solutions actually compounding the problem? An example of that would be, if Peace Corps comes in to teach somebody how to farm better in a third world country, and they bring in technology that is great for the area. They have tractors that can actually stay level on a mountainside so it doesn't tip over. Self-stabilizing tractors and all that. Great technology, but if they don't have the ability to actually maintain that equipment, has it really helped? Mm-hmm. Or is it fostering another relationship where they're relying on outside investors to maintain what they have? Or would it be better to just show them how to make a better hand plow? And what they can do locally to increase productivity in agriculture or something. So I think that's a lot of, we can start, a power company, for example, like we talked about last time. But if we're limiting it so much or only giving all the power to certain people, are we going to foster more problems in the future than solutions?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the coronavirus is a example that's very alive right now, where people will say things along the lines of, this is exactly where federalism doesn't make sense, because viruses don't pay attention to state borders, and therefore you need a national or even international response to think about containment and remediation, all that kind of stuff. And yet, what we have seen on the other side of that story is different states have tried very different methods, and it's not as though there is some sort of uniform, this is exactly what we should have done. I think we're still trying to figure that out. And we're seeing some experimentation, different approaches with different results. So I guess, is there a situation in which you would say, you know what, we need a national or international response to this because it's just too big? I mean, certainly that is the language used around global warming, that we're talking about the demise of the entire planet. We can't afford to wait for solutions to percolate up, that kind of thing, or individual countries to decide they need to do what they need to do, that kind of thing. We need somebody to step in and take action, bold action, save us from ourselves.
Problem with that is not everybody complies. So
well, and that's where I was going to go, is that I think as we're talking, human nature is human nature. And I think, and corruption, all those things are part of the human condition. And I think that what, in my mind, the challenge is the monopoly part. So yes, something could seem too big to fix, and we need a solution. We need to be safe from ourselves. But the thing is there's just so many issues that come with that. Is it right for this particular person? Is it right for this particular community? Are we dealing, I mean, there's just the people that then are administering it. Are they just going to steal the money and do their own thing? Are they going to funnel it to their pet projects? So I think the issue is the monopoly. I do think you have to have that scalability. And I think we have international organizations. I mean, all the churches are a really good example of that. Today, the churches are voluntary today. They weren't always voluntary, but they are today. So like the churches and there's SGI Buddhism, and there's all these different international groups that are doing all kinds of amazing work, including Quakers, including Catholics. And, I think in the past, has there been a white savior complex and come in, or not just white savior, any savior? When you come in and try to fix it for someone, as you guys said, that isn't going to work. But when you're working as a collaboration and asking people, hey, what is the problem? What are the problems you're trying to solve? What can we do? Maybe Elon Musk has come up with a solution, and this little village in I don't know, Senegal, they want, they're going to completely skip. All I can think of is cell phones right now, but you could have had central authority come in and do the telephone, have telephones and fix that system. But when cell phones happened, they skipped that and went straight to cell phones, right? And the cell phone changed and ended a huge amount of poverty in Africa. And I don't think, my sense, that was not charity. My sense that was all for profit. And you had people using, they would sell use of their cell phones to their neighbors. And I'm sure they charitably shared their cell phones too, right? But it wasn't us coming in, Europeans, and fixing it for them. It was Africans like, hey, I want this technology. So I don't know, I was kind of jumbled there, but I just think there's access. One thing I wanted to add, if you look at as well, Quakers have a non-hierarchical governance structure. The 12-step programs like AA and Al-Anon also have that. And they have, in addition to their steps, which is kind of their spiritual and their practical process, they have 12 traditions and 12 concepts. And the concepts are how they run the business side. And there is, I wish I could remember what the concepts are, but they really kind of focus on, once the group, this non-hierarchical group, has given authority for a service organization to take care of this task, X task, then they have all the authority to do that. Just like in our Quaker meetings, once we've given a committee the authority to do something, they have 100% authority, right? So I think that is something to look at, is everybody has a veto power, but once we give authority in a certain room to one of us or a group of us, then you can't have double-headed authority. You have to give them that authority to do it. And if they stink at it or they're bad, then you can remove them. It's kind of like the people that that feel like monarchy is the way to go, because in a monarchy, you have one person accountable. And then when the monarch is bad, you can just kill him. I've heard people talk about that, but I mean, that's like a legit, there's a whole group of people that are monarchists, and it really comes down to this. You can tell who has the authority, and then you can remove them. So that's my only point, is it seems like in these anarchist structures, you do have to appoint authority on specific issues. And then if the person isn't doing it, remove them. So I think authority, clear authority is important to make these things work.
It just strikes me, Juliet, that you've opened a Quaker can of worms. I feel like there should be a gong or something when this happens. But there's this whole idea of mutual submission, and when you become a member of a monthly meeting, right? You, in some ways, you are accepting their leadership guidance, what they define as membership. And similarly, most all monthly meetings are members of some yearly meeting structure. And so there, to some extent, Quakers are non-hierarchical, but there is that scaling of authority. And this has become increasingly a contentious issue, where who decides where spirit is leading, right? And we've talked about this before. Yearly meetings are splitting up around the country because monthly meetings are going in different directions than the yearly meeting thinks is appropriate. And so this is a live issue right now. Are Quakers, in fact, non-hierarchical? And can we just say, okay, you're in charge of this, we've invested you with this, and the oversight doesn't really have any oversight of that because you are in charge of it. I don't know. what do we think about any of that?
Well, my only comment, and then I'll shut up because now I'm the one talking too much today, Jared, is that organizing around task specific. So government is like this big amorphous thing, and it takes care of all these different big things that have nothing to do with each other, right? So to me, if something is so big that it needs to be scaled up and to be very specific, I would rather have it organized only around that task, and then everybody that has a stake in it or has an interest, then those people organize and care about it, right? I don't really want government elected people that may have absolutely no interest in this making the decisions around it. So in some ways, government isn't specific enough and isn't. So anyway, that's my rant.
All right, Jared, your turn.
Yes. Bring it together.
Bring it together. Okay, that's a big task there. I think though that communication is the biggest deal. You know, how are we communicating with each other, and are we willing to communicate? You know, if there is a problem going on in an area, are we fully communicating what the problem is and what the solutions are, and are we open to outside suggestions, or are we just expecting me to have the answer to everything? Or are we allowing space for other people to contribute? Because you know, like clean water, there are other options than just coming up with a centralized water treatment plant. For, you know, electricity, even there are other options than a big power plant, because we can do community-based, you know, battery based things that they are doing that in Africa. There are places that you can go to charge your cell phone in one area, and then you pay like 25 cents or something like that, and you can charge your cell phone, and then you can go home and you're good for a couple of days. So I think if we're not allowing for communities to discuss things and allowing space where everybody has an equal voice, then we're kind of cutting off that communication, and then we're not allowing for others to participate. And that kind of gets to the monopoly.
This is
Go ahead, Matt.
We may have our next topic here, because this idea of communication, as you're hitting on, Jared, and the idea of scaling up, Juliet, that you mentioned, you know, it strikes me that maybe this is part of our issue, right? Because has there been sort of a fundamental breakdown in this scaling, and is it at root a communication issue? We've got yearly meetings breaking up, and does that mean they're not attending to the sort of local issues that are arising in a way that's helpful? We've got candidates consistently, I think, we can go out on a limb and say here for all the parties that almost all the party is not really happy with, but somehow they're who are representing the party, right? At the presidential level, at least. How does this happen? And I'm just raising the question for us to consider whether or not our models are functioning, and what's our responsibility if so. But we are running out of time too.
I think that's a good place to kind of highlight what our next video might be.
We're not locking ourselves into anything.
We don't lock ourselves in, because we're Quakers. We move as the spirit moves. But I do think a lot of the issues that we have revolve around, we haven't fully talked about it. We haven't allowed those that feel as if they're being neglected or marginalized to fully express what is going on. And we haven't allowed ourselves to be open to hearing what we might be contributing. And if we're not willing to listen to each other and to accept people as equal human beings, then how are we going to come up with a solution? Then we're requiring that somebody else comes in and forces others to participate.
We can go with Cool Hand Luke and call it a failure to communicate. We can go with Led Zeppelin and we can all sing Communication Breakdown. Tune in again. You don't know what you're going to find. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks. Y'all have a good week.
You too.